Good morning or good evening. It's of course depending on where in the world you're sitting, but at least I hope that you're safe and that you are sitting pretty comfortably, because this next half hour is going to be a session which I chose to call it "The best way to predict the future is actually to create it." So today agenda, we have like three main points that we need to run through. The first one is hacking the e-commerce space, and this is a little bit of a story behind the world's first digital clothing collection. And then the second point is digital physical mashup. It's really, really hard to pronounce, but it's actually the second project, and actually is built on all the learnings and all the stuff that the insights that we had from our first project. And in the end, we're gonna have what's in the future, just to make sure we touch upon what's coming at us going ahead. So, like you just heard, Q&A, you can ask them while we are going through this presentation. I'll see if I can handle them on the fly, or else we can find time at the end to kind of like answer them. Or else you're always welcome to kind of like contact me afterwards. Really didn't get an answer on, but besides that, before we start this session, I think it's really, really useful to touch a little bit upon Vice and Virtue. I guess a lot of people are familiar with Vice and Vice as a media, but Virtue is basically the agency born out of Vice. And actually what is different with Virtue from the normal kind of like network agencies is we need to kind of maybe backpedal a little bit, because like growing up in the 90s and doing my part of graffiti and all the other stuff you're doing in that age, I was of course also reading Vice. And one of the good thing about Vice was that they allowed themselves to always have an opinion in their writing. And where normal media is normally writing a little bit more neutral for people to kind of like make up their own mind, Vice was not afraid to kind of like say, this sucks, or this is fucking amazing, or whatever it is. And kind of like that kind of like thing about always allowing themselves to have their own POV is something that we have embedded into Virtue. So Virtue is now a global network agency as well. It has 26 offices around the world. But we have that difference that we are not only taking the point of view of our clients, but we allow ourselves to also bring our own point of view into all the creative work that we're doing. So that's a little bit of a background here. So these next two projects is something that we've been creating within Virtue on multiple offices. So to kick it all off, I think this picture pretty much really sets the scene. We're going to talk about e-commerce and how to enter this water. And I feel like this visualization of it's pretty much like sets the mood and tone of which in e-commerce are in now. It's like a lot of big players. It's no longer about what you can offer. It's a price war. It's about like Google AdWords and SEO and so on and so on. So kind of like getting yourself into that water, it's pretty difficult these days. And that is actually the challenge that we were asked for by this client called Carlings. And to put a little bit this project and Carlings into a context, we also need to rewind time a little bit. So we are going back to 1985, and Carlings opened up their first fashion store in Oslo, Norway. And Carlings was at that point in time the first one to actually sell denim as a lifestyle product. Before that, it was more likely, you know, like workwear, labor, stuff like that. So it wasn't that well perceived by the Norwegian people either. They didn't kind of at that time really get what was this denim thing about. But a few years later, this happened. Bruce Springsteen released his album Born in the USA, and he went on this global tour. And he also came around to visit Oslo. And he was quite popular at that point in time, you must say. So like there was 40,000 people showing up to his concert in Oslo that evening. And that is a lot at that point in time. And Bruce himself actually showed up in what we call a Canadian tuxedo, meaning that he was wearing denim from top to toe. And the day after that concert, Carlings was sold out. and it created a huge demand of denim wear going like decades ahead. And Carlings today has like around 200 physical stores in the Nordics and some in the Netherlands as well. And their main products are brands like Levi's, Wrangler, a lot of denim wear. They also have their own line of clothing as well that they're also selling from these physical stores. But despite like being very successful in the physical world, they actually never made it online. So that is pretty rare when you're actually having that many kind of like physical stores that you didn't have that at one point in time thought about like we maybe need to open up a web store at some point. So, but that what was they were thinking at that point in time. So again, going 2 years back to the summer of 2018, they called us up, and you need to put it into context. Carlings have their own in-house agency, and they do all their fashion shoots and lookbooks and all that stuff themselves. So they're not used to working with agency, but again, they knew Vice, and they knew that we were very much in contact with a younger audience. So they actually called us up pretty blank canvas and say, "Hey, Virtue, we would like to open online. Can you help us creating awareness around this?" And we were, of course, answering the call with, of course, sure. But can you tell us a little bit more about what is the catch? What's the digital differentiation that you're going to have in this landscape? Because we, of course, thought like there must be something that we can actually work from, being a little bit different and going into this red ocean. But they were actually just returning the question to us and say like, that's why we actually called you guys. So we actually was a little bit shocked about like, so this was actually just like, we needed to create awareness around them opening up online in the year of 2018. And actually at the end of 2018. So just opening online didn't seem like that was going to create a lot of buzz. So, but we went up there to have the first meeting with them, and we decided on looking on some KPIs and all that stuff you usually do, but there wasn't that many. It was more or less like, we are opening, you need to create traffic. And we knew at that point in time that could be pretty hard because who gives, to be completely honest. So on the train home from Stockholm, we actually thought to ourselves like, this quite feels like a brief that is almost like 10 years too late. It feels like a brief we should have got like, I think around 2010, if we wanted to make something that was really useful. And even earlier, if we wanted to be like first movers and create a platform and create a community around this web shop. So it was pretty much a bummer, but at the same time, we also asked ourselves, what if we spin this brief around about being 10 years too late? What if we actually turn around to being 10 years ahead? What would it actually look like if you open up a web shop 10 years ahead from now? What would the inventory be? What would the consumer journey be? What would everything be in a web shop 10 years from now? And at that point of time, I was so into the whole thing about Little Michaela and digital avatars and all that stuff. And for everybody who doesn't know who Little Michaela is, I guess a lot of you do, but just to make sure that everybody understands. So Little Michaela is a virtual influencer, which means that she doesn't exist. She only exists through Instagram. And what is really, really nicely done with Little Michaela is that not only is she kind of like fucking with your mind in terms of, is she real or is she not? She also creates the most perfect captions to create this narrative around her life. And she have like even a boyfriend and a cousin and a lot of other characters in her life. And she constantly thinks that she's a real human. At the same time, she understands she's only like digital born. And Little Michaela has like 1.6 million followers. And what is also pretty notable about Little Michaela is that you cannot just go in and follow Little Michaela. She's one of the first influencers which has an algorithm attached to it. So you can actually check your own coolness about like applying to follow Little Michaela, because if you follow the right people, you will also be able to follow Little Michaela. So that's is also something very interested at the same time. But again, based from the attraction of like this happening with the virtual influencers, and probably also be something that we're going to see a lot more in the future, I'm thinking about like, if there's virtual influencers, there must also be virtual clothing in the future, something you can only wear online. Because if you look into the gaming industry, people are talking about skins, selling skins, and all this kind of stuff, and they've been doing that for ages. But the thing is, like, the fashion industry never got into that, because like when they're talking about skins, they're talking about reskinning that gun, and who wants to create a Gucci Kalashnikov? So I think like a lot of the fashion industry is like looking at it from a distance, saying like, we want to get into this industry, but we don't want to be the people who customize weapons in gaming. So we, with this kind of like idea to kind of like set the brief of being, let's create a web shop that is opening up 10 years ahead. We're also starting looking into some of the key insights that we could add to it. And this is just pretty basic. So I guess for all the people who works in retail or other places, I think this is also pretty common knowledge. So fashion has moved away from the runway in Paris to the streets of every city, creating the big street fashion movement, and then into Instagram as soon as that became a thing. So today, for being the most fashionable person in the world, you don't really need to be living in New York City or London or Paris or whatever. You can just be as creative as you want and live in the most Nordic part of Norway, as long as you kind of like pushing fashion and using Instagram as an outlet to push fashion. So again, the first movers is no longer placed in cities, they are placed all over the world, and they're pushing fashion even more than you have to do back in the days, because now everybody has like a podium to showcase their version of fashion as well. So again, fashion is on Instagram. At the same time, we also start digging into a little bit more shopping behavioral surveys as well. And we found this great survey from Barclaycard. And Barclaycard is this English bank who actually oversees a lot of the transitions happening within the e-commerce space. And in this survey, they also stated that 1 out of 9 UK shoppers admit to buying a piece of clothing only to take a photo on social media, before even returning it or just putting it into the closet for never to be used again. So of course, there is a lot of shoppers in the UK, and if 1 out of 9 of them is actually creating overconsumption to this habit of just like making a piece of outfit for social media, then we have quite a problem. And we also knew that due to social media, the amount of fashion being created every year has increased, I think, around 60% over the last decade. So that was pretty shocking as well. And also another insight, which is, I think, is really important as well, is clothing is worn just 7 times on average before getting thrown out. And this has also been increasing during these last 10 years. And if you add to that the fashion industry is the second most polluting industry in the world. And just to again, like put things into a context, I think it's like air traffic and traffic in general is on number 10. So it kind of like paints a pretty dramatic picture of like that something needs to be done. And again, people in the industry are working really hard to actually creating solutions to make a better and more sustainable future for fashion. And there is no just one solution. So I think it's about creating multiple solutions to make a more sustainable way to consume fashion. So when we work with these kind of things creatively, we always put our ideas into this framework to kind of like see how they work. And we, of course, being born out of Vice and being used to creating news, we, of course, work with the 5 news criteria. We also work with the global conversation, and the global conversation is key trending conversation that is happening on the internet. It's about, I think, 100 conversation, which is happening all around the world in different forums, like generally just on the internet, so you can track that and you can see what to tap into. And then we have something called the cultural nerve. And the next slide here, you can see how we kind of like map this idea about creating a digital clothing collection into this system. So of course we knew creating this, it will create a conflict because like, okay, so now you can actually purchase fashion which you cannot wear in the physical space, and who would actually buy into that? The sensation of actually doing something that hasn't been done before. And of course, also the global conversation around climate change, which is of course created like extremely huge. And the future of the internet, how can these two things benefit from each other? And then last, the cultural nerve, we have influencers. And influencers, while it's just stand here as like something like obviously, yeah, of course you just need to do something with influencers. That was not what we meant by influencers. At that point of time, influencers, like everybody hate influencers because we are tired of influencers. They have too much like, too big of a spotlight compared to what they're actually communicating. And again, what I meant about the cultural nerve is all the things that is not in the media, but it's something that you're talking with all your mates around lunch. And that was definitely something that we were talking a lot about, like there needs to happen something. If we still need to be working with fashion in the way that we are now, where they kind of like put up a lot of pictures, but without having a deeper meaning to them, it kind of like it's bores you in the end. So there needs to be a better solution for them to at least not harm the planet. So this is the kind of the framework we'd added in this idea. So just to kind of boil it down. So we took the futuristic approach of Lil Miquela and virtual influencers, and we then merge it with the topic of like a more sustainable fashion industry. And this was pretty much again going back to bringing our own POV. So when working with us, and we had to work with Carlings, we said we need to address sustainability and create something that can actually be a solution going out there. And again, Carlings being a fashion brand and a fashion retailer at the same time, said like, yes, we are actually doing a lot for sustainability. We're actually doing more than you could imagine, but we have a really, really difficult time to actually communicate all the good initiatives that we're actually doing around sustainability to our audience. And I think like it's pretty obvious why it's so hard for them to communicate these kind of things, because often when they communicate all the sustainable, like all the things that do better for the environment, it's always like here you can buy these pair of jeans. It has been consuming 10,000 liters less water than usual. And for the average consumer, that doesn't even make sense. So I think, again, we needed to make sure when we talk about sustainability, we need to talk to something that they can understand, and not just from inside out, but outside in, so to say. So this was the idea. And we packed up all our insights, and we packed up the main idea and key visuals and everything. And we went back to Oslo and we presented this idea in front of the board. And I think like the best reaction is maybe to get the CEO to kind of like explain what he got out of that meeting.
That meeting was the strangest meeting of my life, because actually, I honestly didn't understand what they were talking about, making a digital collection and all those kind of things. And I was like, this can't be serious. This is nothing that the consumers would be interested in.
Oh. So again, I hope that you could hear this this statement from him. So in general, 1 second, I'm just having a Q&A thing on top of my screen here. There we go.
That meeting.
So what happened after that meeting? Clearly, they didn't quite understood the idea. So there was completely quiet in the meeting room after I had presented this idea. I remember like just this weird feeling of like, yeah, this is not going the right way. So they said like, we're gonna call you in a few days. And yet they did. They called me 2 days after and said like, we really like the thinking about this and how you're coming at it, and like the whole futuristic approach to it and sustainability and all that. But it's too risky. You're talking about sustainability and cannot do that as a fast fashion company brand. So we like the thinking, but you need to come up with an idea that is kind of like just as provocative, but without a sustainable angle to it. So that was, of course, pretty much like a bummer. So we decided to invite them back 2 weeks after to a workshop, and under the impression that we're going to present them 4 new ideas. But what we did was actually to present the same idea, and just like with way more strategy around it, so they really understood the breathtaking of this idea. And at the end, they actually said, fuck it, let's do it. And then we actually create the digital collection. And I'm just gonna play a video for you to kind of like see the project as a whole. Here we go.
Our generation lives in a paradox. On one hand, we love to express our style and creativity online. On the other, we want to reduce all the production waste that has a negative impact on the environment. A paradox caused by the unwritten rule that we can't be seen online in the same outfit twice. So how do we secure a better future while maintaining our creative output online? With a digital clothing collection, a series of virtually fitted fashion items that you only wear in digital space. This is how it works. First, you take a picture. You choose a product from the web shop before a 3D tailor adjusts the product to your image. Now, your outfit is ready to be shared on social media. This is a new way of expressing our fashion creativity without leaving a negative footprint on the world. The solution did not only challenge today's e-commerce conventions and brand experiences, it challenged an entire industry's ideas and innovations towards more sustainable solutions. And once the webshop was open, the newest fashion phenomena traveled across the globe.
Altså dels er der jo det miljømæssige aspekt i, at I faktisk ikke producerer tøj.
Gör de ju under hashtaggen address the future. They are one of the few brands that have a creative approach to this problem.
So yes, and sorry we got a little bit late into this, so I think we still have something to cover here, but again, if you need to jump off, or either you can hang around and I can easily continue. But yes, we created this project, creating the first digital collection, and the thing about creating a digital collection is normally when you have to create a collection, it costs a lot of money because you need to kind of like sample it and actually create it into a physical product. But what is happening with the digital fashion is that it's actually disrupting the industry at the same point as, like, I guess the music industry was disrupted by the laptop. So like James Blake is doing his album in his bathroom. Like a digital collection is actually made only on computers and could be multiplied and sold only from computers. And we did the whole thing inside VIRTUE, from making the first sketches to actually creating it in the program called Marvelous Designer, which is pretty intuitive. It's not that complicated, actually. You can basically learn the basics pretty fastly. And in this program, you have everything from like gravity and textures and all that stuff. So you can really create a lot of great stuff pretty fast. So again, creating digital collection is something that I think a lot of brands should be aware of. Like they don't have to fear other competitors. They could also be fearing people sitting at home with a laptop and actually creating the next big multi-brand on the social media space. We have some response from our audience. We created this video with the ID that kind of like talk with a lot of different influencers, everything from people who needing adaptive wear because of have losing arm and whatnot, to plus size models and all that stuff. And you can check out that video. You can just like Google ID and digital fashion and that will come up. So we're going to skip it to make sure we come a little bit, or we get through this presentation.
Digital.
So just to ramp up this this project of the first digital clothing collection. So one thing that when we had to kind of like close down the shop, of course we created the traffic that was needed to actually to actually also show the main objective which was to kind of like show the physical shop. So that was like that was an A+ in that job. But when we looked into the feeling of actually purchasing a digital piece of fashion compared to a physical piece of fashion, it was quite striking that it wasn't nearly the same. So when people actually, everybody I guess knows the feeling about buying a new shirt and then just wearing it and feeling comfortable or feeling like you are the shit because it really suits you. But when people were purchasing a piece of digital fashion and actually uploaded an imagery to social media, they were not like feeling of ownership of that piece of clothing. They were feeling more or less like the kick from the likes and the story to tell around it. So we knew we had to kind of like add that feeling of ownership in some direction on the second project that we had to do with Carlings. And also deploy into consumers' pockets is really, really something that we need to focus on. Again, the consumer journey was pretty basic. If you could kind of like make a checkout on a regular web shop, then you could consume or buy digital fashion, because everything that happened was like when you purchase a piece of fashion, or a piece of clothing, you just got asked to upload the picture. We got the picture, the fashion got, or the piece of clothing got added to that page, sent back, and you can upload it again. But we also knew that to kind of be really successful, we need to get into the platform which people already are. And again, going back to our previous insight, is Instagram, of course. So that was the two main points, alongside a lot of other points, of course, that we have to focus on this next project. So we looked at ATF 2.0, Address the Future 2.0, in the summer of 2019, almost a year after. And we knew we had to go digiphysical. And like I explained earlier, digiphysical is kind of like taking a physical object and kind of like pair it with the digital space. So kind of like creating this cross function product that can also be used in the real life, but also have a function in the digital space. So, and the starting point for this was also to look a little bit back into fashion history. And fashion has always been a way to kind of like express your point of which you believe, or your point to society, and kind of voice to the outside world, at least for the youth, to kind of like what you believe in. And we also thought about the whole thing that's happening, of course, with the climate change and also the marches and all that stuff. How can we create a statement t-shirt for that generation? How can we kind of like reimagine that? But of course, the issue with that generation is that we have a generation that actually thinks twice before even buying something, because they actually they are way more thoughtful than previous generations. So creating a statement t-shirt, which had to kind of like every time you want to change your statement to kind of like put on social media, you need to buy a new statement t-shirt. That doesn't make sense. So pretty much kind of like came together. What if we could create this augmented reality t-shirt that could actually create where you can get your statements out on social media without actually buying a new t-shirt every time. So this is what we created, the last statement t-shirt for social media. It looks a little bit like this. So it works directly in Instagram. So it works with filters. So the whole trick around this is basically to take the technology from face filters and ask it to look for something else. So we asked the camera, when you open up your phone in Instagram filters, to look for this ATF logo. And as soon as the phone kind of like captures that logo, it starts superimposing the filter which you have been choosing. So pretty basically, and then it's, of course, you can move freely, and it will start according to the measurements of your phone, it will start superimposing so it fits in and kind of like blends in nicely. And just to show here how it looks in kind of a live demonstration, You go into Carlings officials kind of Instagram page, then you pick your filter, and then you add the logo on the screen on top of the logo on the shirt, and then you start superimposing. So it's pretty easy and it's runs seamlessly. And what is really, really cool about this technology is that every shirt becomes this living medium, which means that all the influencers that now have this t-shirt can now report from stuff happening around the world. And we constantly updated the filters to kind of like show kind of like what was happening out there. And again, the filters even works pretty closely. As you can see, it's actually pretty nicely integrated with the garment itself, getting really, really tightly. But again, what we talked about, for instance, wildfires, we've just been through a crazy season of wildfires. And we could actually, instead of like just doing a post that says like that certain amount of hectares has now been burned off, we can actually combine that with a digital or like with a fashion expression of a design and actually communicate that through a shirt. So we can actually use all these influencers, all the people who have this to kind of like report from these kind of things, and also tell the story about like wildfires to an audience who probably doesn't read as many news as a lot of other people do. So this was kind of like a way to hack news and in general like points what happens in the world to an audience in a different way. So again, yeah, you can still purchase the shirt online. We just had a new batch created. The first 1,000 shirt, which was created to create this pilot project, was sold out pretty quickly. We, of course, because it's through Spark AR on Instagram, we have a lot of data on this, and in an average, each shirt kind of created 26 stories. Which, of course, if you look at like the average t-shirt or the average piece of fashion today only being worn 7 times, it's a lot. And also we had a lot of impressions on each shirt. So around 12,000 impressions were generated per each shirt. So again, these kind of like statements, like for instance, some records should not be broken, actually got pretty far out in the system. So again, and all the profits went to Water Aid for this project. So this is again just to show this is not about only creating a piece of fashion for a statement or whatnot. This is actually a reminder to the entire fashion industry that they need to think of the digital consumer journey of a physical product. Because like now we just told the phone to look for this ATF logo, but basically you can tell the phone to look for whatever you want to. So you basically need to reimagine, if you are Gucci and you have a Gucci logo, or if you have a limited edition sneakers with a cute teddy bear inside of it, what will happen if we turn on our phones towards these items? And it also allows us to do limited editions and a lot of other stuff. So I think again, this was again to inspire an entire industry to kind of like make sure that you think of the digital afterlife and not only like the physical and the experimental in stores and everything. What happens when we turn our phones to all these kind of things? So last but not least, we are going to look a little bit into the future and what is coming at us. Of course, like I touched upon earlier, gaming and fashion is definitely trying to find each other in a nice marriage. Nike released their Jumpman into Fortnite. Louis Vuitton kind of like created a big sponsorship with League of Legends. In the middle, you have this really, really nice dress, which is created from The Fabricant. The Fabricant, if you don't know them, you should try to look them up. They are a digital fashion couture house. So meaning that they actually do digital fashion in the most high risk and in the most advanced as possible solution. They want it to be as real as possible. And they created this piece of this couture dress last year and actually auctioned it away in New York. And it got purchased from $9,500 by a Bitcoin billionaire. So again, this is just setting the standard of even though it doesn't cost that much to create digital fashion in reality, and it can be done from your home. this kind of like sets the bar. There's no limited for what you can charge for a piece of digital clothing. And we also see that in the gaming industry with skinning running up to crazy amount of money when being purchased. The last example on the right is a project we did together with the Fabricant, and it's called Hot Second, and it's a circular concept store. So the idea was here to actually create the first physical store with only digital inventory, meaning that the idea behind this pop-up shop that opened up in London was to actually, you can bring a piece of physical clothing that you want to recycle, and for that piece of digital clothing, you then get a piece of digital clothing in return. And the whole idea was actually to make sure that people could get dressed in the shop. So there was create these kind of like mirrors that actually dress people on the spot while trading in their physical piece of clothing. And I think looking ahead, we're going to see not far away ahead, like stores opening up on high street with only digital products at hand. So again, this is looking a little bit ahead. And when we look again, the next 5 years, the money is still going to be in AR. Again, everybody talks about Google Glasses, and not Google Glasses anymore. Now it's Apple Glasses. Google Glasses is done a few years ago, but Apple Glasses is going to bring AR into this next chapter. But again, like AR is all around us, and it's sometimes used by a lot of people who actually not even know that actually using AR. Rather, it's through face filters, it's through wayfinding in stores, or placing furniture, which has become a commodity. Today, like 5 years ago, being able to place a sofa in your living room was like mind-blowing. But today it feels a little bit odd if you're not allowed to actually to work with augmented reality, actually buying furniture and so on. And the last example, which is out on the right, is a new technology which is called 6D AI. And 6D AI is a technology that allows you to actually scan a room, scan objects with the use of a camera only. So normally, if you have to create 3D projections of objects, you need to have a sensor that can actually measure depth. But this technology allows you to kind of like, based on reflection, based on shadowing on objects, to actually start to build this 3D model of whatever environment you are in. And that's also something that is called LiDAR, which is also implemented into the new iPads coming. And that's a NASA technology that they're also using when they go into Mars and stuff like that to actually measure without having a sensor. So it's going to be implemented, and it's going to be a huge thing, because now everybody can scan and then upload that to the cloud and actually be able to kind of like build from that. Last but not least, I'm also going to show you some few examples of some nice AR projects. I think Alexander McQueen really pushing it with the in-store experiment of what's possible with AR. These kind of like really natural looking kind of like bugs crawling around. They were also doing butterflies and other stuff. Really, really funny way to have people create content on their pretty boring shoes. And again, like on the right, which is a really huge game changer. It seems pretty basic, but this is actually showing that through your browser, you can actually do augmented reality now. Normally you have to do it through an app that works together with the phone, but now you can actually do this through your browser. So this is again, Burberry kind of like showcasing some of their bags in an environment of augmented reality. So that is also something that you then now can do directly on websites and so on, which is a huge game changer in that space. And last but not least, we're looking at a project and a company called Hello Me, which is all about creating kind of like holograms within kind of like various apps. And this would also be applied to Instagram. So soon you'll be able to actually have a walkway or like a runway within your home, or like showcase products within your feed when you actually see it. So you're not only now able to see it as a product display, you can also like have that model actually 3D in front of you, kind of you can go close and see the different details and these sort of things. To round this session up, I just want to show this is growing. And this is some numbers we have from Boston Consulting Group. And this is just to show that in the United States, where we have like a penetration of smartphones on almost 70%, 80 million people were monthly using some sort of AR in the end of 2018. And looking ahead, we can see that in 2021, it's like 120 million people who would monthly using AR in some kind of way. And as you can see, the white line, which is social media, shows that AR doesn't not only happen in social media, it also happens within apps and so on. So again, like there's a lot of things, and it actually pretty nicely goes along with the curve of smartphone users, which of course is getting higher and higher going ahead. So this was really fast, I think, but again, I hope you kind of like got the points of these two projects and what is happening in the future. I'm just gonna, if people are still on, just gonna read out some of the questions coming in here. I think the first question is how to sell clothes now or in the nearest future with the COVID crisis. I think again, digital fashion is more relevant than ever before with this crisis. I think again, being able to update your wardrobe without actually having to go down to a physical store or start to purchase crazily online. I think this is a really nice tool. I think the idea around this project was also to create a solution for the most hardcore fashion people on Instagram. I'm not saying that everybody will add or start wearing digital clothing in the future, but I think again, this is a small, again, like I said earlier, this is a small solution for making a more sustainable way of consuming fashion. So I think like with the Corona crisis, this is actually a nice idea to actually work with digital fashion as a way of still creating new content and expressing your style without leaving your home. I'm gonna read one more question up. So again, this is kind of like a question around the longevity, and of course also like building foundation and right traffic to build for the e-commerce offer. So again, we created traffic to a website which didn't offer anything special. And again, in the e-commerce space, like it's about comparing prices. If you want a pair of Dr. Martens, you just like go Google and then you find the cheapest place to kind of like buy that. So I think we are still struggling with, of course, like making sure that platform is relevant due to the products. But at least again, I think Carlings have taken this project into an internal phase as well. So they launched this initiative called Address the Future, which they have now like hired 3D artists to actually and 3D tailors to actually do all the sampling going ahead. So they are starting to switching from doing physical samples to digital samples. So in that way, this initiative kind of like turned them into be more sustainable in their production habits as well. I think we have to end on this then. It's 52. I just want to say thank you for all who had the patience to stay in, and thank you so much for listening in. And again, if you have any questions, just shoot away.